Life, wisdom.
Oh, hi, I'm Dr. Colin Ross. I'm a psychiatrist, live and work in Dallas, and I want to talk today a little bit about antipsychotic medications, which are for schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, being psychotic. And being psychotic is a little bit hazily defined in psychiatry, but basically it means when you're really out of touch with reality, very delusional, disorganized thinking, hallucinating. That's the extreme version of what psychosis is. And the typical main diagnosis is schizophrenia, which means you've been psychotic on and off for a long time. And the medications for that are called antipsychotics. So the first thing is, what do they do? Well, this is pretty well worked out. So the science on this is pretty solid. There's in your brain, you have one nerve communicates with another nerve. And it does that by sending a transmitter across the synapse, which is the space between the two nerves. And the transmitter that's involved here is called dopamine. And what these drugs do is they block the receptor on the second nerve site. So the signal comes down the first nerve, the receptor, the nerve releases the neurotransmitter dopamine, which goes across the synapse, hooks onto receptors on the second nerve, and when enough neurotransmitter hooks onto enough receptor, the next nerve gets stimulated, electrical signal goes down that nerve. That's how the brain nerves talk to each other. And it was discovered really by accident in the early 50s that a drug which was originally a anesthesia-related drug, an animal tranquilizer called chlorpromazine, was calming down hospitalized people with schizophrenia. So it was just sort of discovered by accident. And then it got used a whole bunch by psychiatrists, got hailed as a wonder drug, and then some other antipsychotics were developed. And then in lab research with rat brains, the pharmacologists figure out that what the drug does is it blocks those postsynaptic receptors. So that's a scientific fact, that's not in doubt. So there's different types of dopamine receptor, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So D2, dopamine 2, seems to be the main receptor that these drugs interact with. No dispute about all of that. And so since somebody with schizophrenia sort of settles down and some of the symptoms settle down, and since that happens from blocking the postsynaptic receptor, the theory was created that the problem in psychosis is too much dopamine. So it wasn't somebody figured out how the brain works. It was they figured out that the drugs settle people down. Then they figured out that the drugs block dopamine. And then they said, oh, well, therefore dopamine must be too high before we give the drug. That's where the dopamine theory of schizophrenia came from. So a couple of questions about these antipsychotic drugs. One is, how well do they work? So one of the newer ones is called Seroquel. And all these antipsychotics basically are equally effective as each other. One person may respond better to one drug than to another drug. But when you look at groups of people, all the different antipsychotics are equally effective. They just have different side effects. And so there's no way to say, oh, because of your symptoms or your family background or your genes or something in your blood, I'm going to choose this antipsychotic instead of that one. There's absolutely no way to tell in advance. You just have to pick one and see how it works. And so what we want to do now is look at Seroquel as an example, and we want to look at the drug study data. And it kind of looks like about like this, roughly. And this is in a journal, and I've read the paper. So this is the psychosis score. We'll call that the psychosis score. And this is the percentage of people who respond. So what you do is in this particular study, there's 361 people who meet the diagnostic criteria for schizophrenia. And they have to score high on a scale called the Brief Psychiatric Rating Scale, which measures psychotic symptoms. The cutoff to get into the study is 27. So you have to score above 27. So the average score coming into the study for the whole group of people, 361 people, is about 47. So let me do graph number 2 before we get any further into this. So the average score is about 47. And so this is 0, this is 50. And then we have people either randomly put on drug or put on placebo. And over time, the drug people and the placebo people go like this. So this is the drop in scores for people on placebo, and this is the drop in scores for people on the drug. And there actually is a little difference, showing that in this study, the placebo was a little bit more effective, a little bit less effective, but the gap is actually pretty small. So this is statistically significant when you do a test here, but it's actually quite small. Then there's another kind of analysis done called a responder analysis. And for this study, you're defined as a responder if your score drops by 40% or more on the brief psychiatric rating scale. So you come in at 47, if you drop down by 40%, you're now a responder. So then we do a bar graph saying, what's the percentage of people who respond to the drug compared to the percentage who respond to placebo? And there actually is a difference. When you look at the bar graph in the paper, it looks kind of impressive. Until you go over here and you say, well, what's the percentage of people that respond? It's just under 30%. 29.2% of people responded to the drug, meaning that 70% did not. And these are the basic scientific facts. Study after study after study, drug after drug after drug. Even in cooperative people who are outpatients, who are organized enough that they can come in every week for 12 weeks, participate in a drug study, they're not in jail, they're not homeless, they're not dead, they're not so disorganized and psychotic they don't show up, and they're not so angry at psychiatry that they won't participate. So that's a pretty select subgroup of people with schizophrenia. Even those people who are cooperative and easy to treat, 70% do not respond. Sure, there's a difference between drug and placebo, but it's not really all that impressive. So those are the facts as to how well these drugs work. So the idea that we have these powerful, effective drugs and a person's got schizophrenia and we're just going to cure that with medication and he'll be well, it's just not a scientific fact. If you look at there's one major study called the CATIE study, which is short for a very long name of the study. And it's very well designed. It was $24 million from the National Institute of Mental Health. And 1,460, if I remember the number right, people came into the front end of this study with schizophrenia. They were given one of the other antipsychotics. And if they responded, carry on. If they didn't respond, you now go to branch in the chart. You either switch to this drug or you add that drug. So it was all very well designed. $24 million of research money, psychiatrists who are very, very motivated to get the best results possible and publish the best papers possible. All the treatment was free, so there's no insurance problems. And so this is really the best that psychiatry can do. With no insurance hassles, highly motivated psychiatrists, very well organized, very carefully monitored. At the end of the study, which was a year and a half down the road, 74% of people had dropped out. So this is the best that psychiatry can do. Keep 26% of people in the study for a year and a half. And when you read the papers on the CATIE study, they don't even talk about symptom reduction. You can't even find it in the paper. You have to search and search and search and search, and you still don't find it. They use the dropout rate as the measure of response, which is very unusual and not done in most studies at all. But if we assume the drug used in that study worked about the same as Seroquel, we'd say about 30% of people would respond. We don't know for a fact how many responded because the authors are not telling us straight up. But let's say that there's 26% of people left in the study, and of them, 30% responded. So we're now down literally under 10%. So the facts in the literature show that when psychiatry's got no problem with funding, no problem with insurance, highly motivated, well-organized, academic psychiatrists, the best they can do with people with schizophrenia is a year and a half later, under 10% are still in treatment and are responders. Where responder only means a 40% drop in symptoms. That's just the state of the art as to how well these drugs work. Now let's talk about the side effects. There's sort of three groups of antipsychotics in a way, but usually they're lumped together in two groups. There's the old ones and the new ones. The new ones are called atypical or novel antipsychotics, and that includes Seroquel, Risperdal, Abilify, and so on. The old ones are Thorazine, Chlorpromazine, Haloperidol, Stelazine. There's a whole group of them. So the old ones you can kind of subdivide into two groups. Ones that have more muscle side effects that mimic Parkinson's disease, and ones that have more what are called anticholinergic side effects, which is dry mouth, blurry vision, weight gain, constipation. In the old drugs, you tend to either have more of the anticholinergic side effects or more of the motor side effects. The new drugs, the novel atypical antipsychotics, have less of the anticholinergic and less of the muscle side effects. So when they first came on the market back in the 90s, psychiatrists were all excited that they seemed to work better. Absolutely proven now that they don't work any better than the old ones. So now psychiatrists are excited that they don't have so many of these motor side effects, which can include permanent muscle twitching, which is very disabling. It's called tardive dyskinesia. But what is true is these new antipsychotics, and some are worse than others, cause metabolic syndrome. That is, weight gain, increased cholesterol, triglycerides, increased blood sugar, and sometimes frank diabetes. So we've traded visible side effects of dry mouth, constipation, trouble passing your urine, or muscle difficulty for more invisible side effects, which really aren't that invisible because people will commonly gain 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds due to these medications, including kids. So we know we have an epidemic of obesity in North America. I just saw data that the number of cases of diabetes in the United States doubled from 2004 to 2013, and the percentage of citizens who are obese went from 20% to 30% in the last 10 years. And these drugs, for a known scientific fact, are contributing to this epidemic of obesity, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes. So that's a problem. An additional problem is, I remember talking to somebody who was a rep for Seroquel, who went around and talked to doctors and basically a marketer for Seroquel. And I remember her telling me that 80% of prescriptions for Seroquel in the United States for children under 18 are for children who do not have a psychotic diagnosis. So actually, and this is known to be true around the world for adults and children, and I've read multiple studies documenting this, most of the antipsychotics are actually prescribed for people who are not psychotic, which is very odd until you go back to the research data and you look at these studies. And so when we're looking at the brief psychiatric rating scale dropping down, there's another scale that's commonly used called the PANS, Positive and Negative Syndrome Scale, in these antipsychotic studies. It measures positive symptoms, negative symptoms, and general psychopathology, which means general mental health symptoms. The negative symptoms are being burned out, empty, withdrawn, no drive, no life, kind of the empty shell type symptoms. The positive symptoms are hallucinations, delusions, agitation, mixed up thought processes. So everybody's agreed that no antipsychotics help with the negative symptoms. They help a little bit with the positive symptoms, not that much more than placebo. But what you see in the studies is, it's not just that the psychotic symptoms go down, the general psychopathology score goes down just as much as the psychotic score. So these drugs aren't actually, in fact, antipsychotics. They work on mental health problems in general just as well. So the fact that they're called antipsychotics is really just accident of marketing and history. Same with the antidepressants. So if you're going to take an antipsychotic, even if you don't have a psychotic diagnosis, as an informed consumer, you need to know these drugs don't work that well most of the time, often don't work at all, and they have a lot of side effects, which are not just little nuisance side effects. They're serious, gaining 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds, blood sugar goes up, sometimes develop actual diabetes, which is going to contribute to cardiovascular disease, which is going to shorten your lifespan. So these are serious things to think about. And that's why I wanted to put some of this information out. Thanks for listening.